What's up, everybody? Welcome to this video on writing two-step openings for your papers. The premise behind the two-step opening is the idea that we're doing science communication. So we have a strong argument backed up by evidence for what we're trying to communicate, which means if you were paying attention to your social psychology classes, that we're interested in persuading people via the central route, which means we want people to be persuaded by our strong arguments, right? So we don't want people to be persuaded via the peripheral route, right? We don't want them to be persuaded because we are at a specific institution or because our paper is in a specific publication or that, we are dressed well or we sound good. We want people to be persuaded by the strength of our arguments, which means we have to convince people to pay attention to our arguments, to read them carefully, and to think through them, right? We want them to want to be motivated to understand the points that we're making. And so to do that, I'm going to present this two-step opening. What the two-step opening does is it starts with a broad fact that anyone should be interested in, and then tells the audience something unexpected. And there's that sort of dissonance there created between what the audience expected based on what you said at first, and then, oh, that's surprising. And that sense of surprise, that unexpectedness, that dissonance, if you will, drives people to want to understand why they were surprised. Oh, how can that thing be true? I know this general fact, but now that surprising little thing, that I need to read more to understand why. So this is how we're going to persuade people via the central route to pay attention to our arguments. We're going to create that tension, that dissonance, that unexpectedness, that surprise, and they're going to want to read to understand why that's surprising, to understand it. And to do that, we're going to look at 5 articles that use this technique. We're going to start with this article titled Gendered Colorism, Evidence from Social Categorization Studies, which we've covered before in this class, and in which I did a title, abstract, introduction, conclusion read, or sometimes people call this like a first pass read, and my goal was to identify the main claim. And you can see here that I wrote here in my own words that the main claim is related to gender, not race, and then all the way down here, I highlighted this main claim here where the authors actually state their main claim, and then I rewrote it in my own words, which was skin tone affects the categorization of Black women as women. Now today, I want to just talk about the craft, the style that these authors use to get people to want to read the whole paper, to think through their strong, logical arguments. So I'm going to highlight this paper. I'm going to use blue for the broad general fact. And then when they get to a key word, I'm going to use green. And I'm going to highlight the surprise or the tension that's being generated with green there. So step 1 will be blue, the broad fact. Step 2 will be green, the unexpected thing that creates that tension, that dissonance that makes the reader want to keep reading so they can find out why they were surprised by this thing. So they start off with just, skin tone bias, popularly known as colorism, is the process of discrimination that privileges lighter-skinned people and disadvantages darker-skinned people within a racial group. Right, there's a fact, right? They've got a cite for it. Here's another fact. Darker-skinned people report experiencing more discrimination. Another fact, another cite. Have lower social, economic, and educational attainment. Another fact, another cite. And are stereotyped more negatively than lighter-skinned Black people. Another cite, another fact, but that is cited. And note that, really, for me personally, I'm already interested in this paper, right? That's because I care about this topic. And so this is a key point. You can get people who already care about your topic to pay attention, to want to read more, just by telling them these important facts, right? But if you want other people to expand your audience, to get more people to want to pay attention to your logical arguments, you've got to now generate some tension. So I'm going to grab the green highlighter. And I know that this next sentence is going to be generating tension because it starts with a key word. That key word is despite. So you'll see often authors using these keywords: despite, however, but, yet, although. And that signals we're about to get the surprising fact, the tension-generating fact. Despite this, there is little empirical research on the psychological manifestations of colorism and how it interacts with gender, specifically how colorism may disproportionately affect Black women. Okay, so great. This paper has a really good example of the two-step opening. A lot of really important facts that I think are interesting on their own, and then generating some tension. Despite all these facts, psychologists really haven't studied this. Why is that? Well, we're going to have to read on to find out. Okay, let's do another paper. I've already done the TAIC, or the first pass read of this paper, and when I read the title, Looking Behind the Stereotypes of the Angry Black Woman, an exploration of Black women's responses to interracial relationships, just based on that title, I thought maybe the main claim of this paper might be maybe a qualitative study in which researchers listen to Black women's views on interracial dating and stereotypes like angry Black women. But then when I read the abstract, and I kept reading through the introduction to get to the main claim, which is actually on the next page, I thought, oh, it's important that this is about heterosexual relationships, and it's really about dispelling stereotypes that people have about Black women for the when it comes to interracial dating. And in the author's own words, this paper is about, therefore, in this article, I will look specifically at the unique ways that African American women respond to Black-white heterosexual relationships and what their responses tell us about racial and gender dynamics in intimate relationships. And it's important to have an idea of this, what the main claim of the paper is when we're analyzing the two-step openings, because the two-step opening should be priming the reader to be ready for their main claim. So we're going to see, don't just randomly generate tension and then, or say something surprising that's not related to your main claim. You're going to try to find something. The real art here, the real skill is to generate tension related to your main claim, so the reader's ready for it. So let's do this. Let's look for these broad facts. I'll highlight them in blue. According to the 2000 census, this is a fact for sure, interracial marriages accounted for only 1.9% of all marriages, and the overwhelming majority of these marriages are white Asian couplings, while marriages between Black people and white people still remain the least common. Here's another a quote. So a quote can be a great way to grab people's attention in the opening of a paper. So as Rockmore and Brunsma argued, Black people and white people continue to be the two groups with the greatest social distance, the most spatial separation, and the strongest taboos against interracial marriage. Now we're going to get some more facts with citations. Previous research has also documented that white-Black interracial couples are viewed more negatively than other racial combinations, and there's a lot of cites for that claim. And now here, we're going to get the tension-generating statement. And it's going to be like this. While the issue of interracial heterosexual relationships between Black people and white people has been explored from many viewpoints, okay, here's something surprising now. The voices of African American women have been largely neglected. And so now we've got the tension. Now the reader is going to want to keep reading. And you can see how the surprising thing here, the thing that generates attention, is tied to the main claim, right? The main claim is, which I have in pink, is, therefore I will look at specifically look at the unique ways that African American women respond to Black-white heterosexual relationships and what their responses tell us about racial and gender dynamics in intimate relationships, right? So that surprising fact, that tension-generating statement, cued the reader to expect that this is going to be a paper about in which we listen to the voices of Black women on this topic. Okay, so great two-step opening there. Let's look at another article with a two-step opening. This article is titled Employment Loss and Food Insecurity, Race and Sex Disparities in the Context of COVID-19. And when I read that title, I initially wrote, Who lost jobs and access to food during COVID-19? And as I read through the abstract, I wrote, specifically they're interested in race and gender. And when I read the conclusion of the abstract, they indicated that, yeah, it's going to be Black women who are most affected, lost the most jobs, or most likely to experience food insecurity. So that's how I'm reading, I'm starting with the title and I'm just adding to my understanding of the paper as we go along. And so that ends up being the main claim, but I did highlight the main claim down here as well in the author's own words. What they're interested in is, this study is part of the larger research that estimated the prevalence of COVID-19 infections in the region with a secondary aim to assess how the pandemic affected their lives across a variety of dimensions, right? So they have this data collected for another purpose, and now they're going to look at it in terms of race and gender disparities related to employment and food security. Okay, but let's see how they did this two-step opening in this paper. So I'm moving to the introduction, and they give employment and food insecurity have been identified as two critical social determinants of health and health equity. And that one there means that's a cite. Women and people of color have historically been at greater risk for both. Two more cites. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, these long-standing social, economic, and health inequalities equities that disproportionately affect women and people of color have intensified. And now we get a key word. So I know right away we're about to get the tension-generating statement. The key word is, of course, however. All right, let's see how they do this. However, the depth and breadth of the pandemic's effects on already socioeconomically marginalized groups needs assessment. And that's going to end up being like what we looked at, race and gender, how they intersect. And it turns out that Black women are the most affected by employment loss and food insecurity. So this is priming me to be ready for their main claim, for their research question, right? It's not just a random tension-generating statement. It's related to the point that they're trying to make with their paper. All right, let's do another one. All right, now this paper is titled In and Out of Love with Hip Hop, Saliency of Sexual Scripts for Young Adult African American Women in Hip Hop and Black-Oriented Television. So when I read this title, I thought, okay, maybe this is a qualitative study in which researchers listen to the opinions, views of Black women on hip hop and sexual scripts, but I wasn't totally sure. It could have been also a quantitative study, like they mentioned specific variables like sexual scripts, television, hip hop. There's definitely things here that could possibly be either manipulated or measured, but I was leaning towards this will be a qualitative study where they listen to the voices of Black women. As I read through the abstract, I learned that the sexual scripts they're looking at two specific sexual scripts, which is Black women as the freak and as the gold digger. And when I got all the way to the end of this first paragraph introduction, I highlighted their main claim, which is this qualitative study serves to give voice to women reflected in and who are consumers of those media, right? So again, this seems like a study where we're going to be listening and learning from Black women about their opinions on these, how they're depicted in hip hop and on television. And this is really important, right? Because like Black women are both creators and consumers of this content, and their voices and views have been absent from the research literature. Okay. But let's see, how did they do the two-step opening? So let's get the blue highlighter out and let's look at the facts they start with. Hip-hop, media, and Black-oriented reality television play a notable part in depicting and shaping Black culture in the USA. And then right away, boom. So hip-hop's really important to Black culture. We already get the tension-generating word though. However, these media also disseminate this culture to the larger society and serve as significant tools in socializing consumers to scripts of Black female sexuality. So we've already got an initial tension-generating statement, but it looks to me, I'm just sort of skimming ahead this paragraph, that they keep going. Right? I think that one is already pretty good, but they go a little bit further, and they add like an unfortunately, so that's going to make me want to read more. What's unfortunate here? Oh, well, the predominant media representations of Black women often illustrate racially stereotyped, highly sexualized images. And that's a fact, but the fact is presented as like something surprising, right? It's a surprising fact, right? Or in this case, something that shouldn't be true, something that should generate tension in us. I'm always saying it's surprising or unexpected. You might be totally expecting that to be the case, and I probably would as well. But it's still something that should generate tension. I should be motivated to like care about this now, right? The impact of these images on young adult African Americans' identity and sexuality has been largely ignored in the literature, right? So here's something surprising. It's been largely ignored in the literature. Scholars assert that the available sexual scripts of African women have a generally negative impact on the development of the sexual selves, and that they include limited, racially stereotyped, and predominantly sexually charged content. I mean, at this point, I am all in on this paper. Like, I want to learn more about what's going on here. I want to learn more. I think I have like some lay ideas of how this would work, but let's hear from a Black woman about what they think. Again, they're the creators and consumers. They are creators and consumers of this content. All right, so again, a great introduction here, priming the reader to expect the research question related to the opinions of Black women, hip hop, and these sexual scripts. Okay, let's do one last paper. This paper is titled, "Ain't I a Woman? Towards an Intersectional Approach to Person Perception and Group-Based Harms." So when I first read this title, I highlighted first the word intersectional. Maybe think, oh, this is probably about intersecting race and gender perceptions, maybe. When I saw the word person perception, I thought, this is probably attitudes or stereotypes. And when I saw the word group-based harms, I thought, okay, some type of discrimination. But as I read the abstract and I got to the introduction where they stated their main claim, what I learned was that, yes, it is about race and gender intersecting, but it's not about attitudes and stereotypes. It's actually about categorization and race-gender associations. And the discrimination, it's a specific type of discrimination, which of course I knew it would have to be. And the specific type of discrimination we're looking at is attractiveness. That, as we'll see in the paper, or as you will see in the paper if you go on and read it, that women, or Black women, are, or I'll say it, I'll just get this of the whole paper, which is that people are slower to categorize Black women as women. There's a strong link between Blackness and maleness, and women are seen as more attractive or less attractive the more masculine they appear, and that ends up affecting Black women the most. So 3 really great studies in this one paper. And let's look at the introduction and see how they do the 2-step opening. So we're going to start with a quote, or like a summary of a quote, basically. So for over a century, Sojourner Truth's defiant refrain, "Ain't I a Woman?" has been a rallying cry for Black feminist women. Truth oration at the Women's Convention, Akron, Ohio, 1851, as transcribed by Frances Gage and Stanton et al., 1881, simultaneously excoriates the erasure of her womanhood as racist and mocks European norms of femininity as absurd. So what an amazing sentence there. I'm already all in, but he's going to provide us a tension-generating statement soon. I'm just pausing quickly to note that it's worthwhile for everyone watching this video to look up how Frances Gage transcribed this speech, how she may have used racial stereotypes or racist stereotypes to change some of the phrasing of the speech, and that there are other perhaps more accurate transcriptions of of that speech. So I'll leave it out there as like something people can look at and find interesting. But here's another powerful statement by these authors here, which is, in 6 short paragraphs, Truth asserts that Black does not mean male, that treating Black women like Black men is a form of racial discrimination, that defining femininity in terms of a white ideal can harm Black women, and that none of these are morally acceptable. So just amazing. I mean, what an amazing speech from back then, and so important for people today, especially researchers in psychology, to keep in mind, to accept. Now, the way that these authors create tension here is by a juxtaposition between, hey, here's something that someone said, 170 years ago, and it's still relevant today, right? So there's not necessarily going to be a key word here, but instead we're going to get, again, that juxtaposition. Hey, people already figured this out. Sojourner Truth already figured this out 170 years ago, but we still need to learn it today. So we get, in the present research, we investigate the possibility that the chief social ill that truth attacks inner speech, the conflation of black with male, has cognitive analogs that persist today. Right? She identified these issues 170 years ago. They're still persisting today. And so that idea primes me for their main claim, which I've highlighted in pink here. And then I wrote in my own words, which is, again, a good step when you're reading these papers. I wrote, race and gender are important for gender categorization, race-gender associations, and attractiveness. So those are the, as you read through here in the abstract, they explain those things. So that's, 5 papers we've seen of authors using this two-step opening, starting with facts, interesting facts, quotes. Sometimes you'll get anecdotes, all interesting. But to get people to switch over to the central route, to be paying attention to your arguments, you've got to create tension via this two-step opening. So start with facts and then hit them with something surprising. And the art and the skill of it is to pick something surprising that primes them to be ready for your main claim. So in all of these papers, they picked something surprising that was related to their main claim and that allowed, steered the reader down a path where when they got to the main claim was completely expected. Of course, that's what they're going to study because look at this surprising thing.